mind taking your shoes off? Pete, now seated in the dining room, fastened to a chair with zip locks from his kitchen drawer, the thin white and hard plastic straps, had yelled out to the bald youth. The fully black-clothed intruder hadn't even given Pete the courtesy of a glance, as the whole while the youth had stared out the window, though barely peeling the curtains. Well, Pete had squirmed and grunted, finally drawing the grim invader back to him. It's just, you see, I'm sure that this is all some misunderstanding. And getting tied up isn't new to me, tshhhh, you should have met my high school bullies. The 70s were tough. Oh, shut up, old man. There's no way that you still remember your high school days. Walking over and then poking the elder's head in conclusion, the smooth-chinned lad had sized up the man from his lofty peak. Is it money that you want? Pete's eyes bulged out in outrageous form, as his eyes desperately followed the man across the room. The youth wandered to the living area, where on the sofa he would crash, flinging his dusty boots on the armrest, nearest to Pete, and while having his head inclined on the opposite armrest. The man's eyes narrowed as he watched Pete, pointing his gun at the elder in repeated manner, as though trying to decipher something about Pete that eluded him. This made Pete even more anxious. It raised more questions. If it wasn't about the money, then what could Pete possibly have of value, or have done, to warrant this assault to personal liberty? What do you want? The chair rattled menacingly, almost tipping Pete to the smooth glossy white tiled floor, which surely would have sprung up more problems than it could have solved. The commotion would cause the pale dark-clothed youth to spring off of his poised cushioned seat, as he launched himself right back in Pete's face. Listen here, old-timer. The boy's jaws were firmly clenched together and his teeth barely parted, as he spoke. There was certain anger in his undaunted eyes. One more word from you and I'm taping up your mouth and locking you in the trunk of your shitty car. The boy pointed in the direction of the garage. I refuse to be talked to that way by some ruffian, who doesn't even know a classic feat of engineering when he sees it. Pete barked. His firm binds hotly tore away at his wriggling skin, as his face had been craned up in a manner that bespoke a lunatic trying to bite off the tip of the intruder's nose. Grrr, what the hell did I get myself into? The boy rolled his eyes. What do I do with this? Beside himself, the intruder would point at Pete. The lad's brazen and cold shell had instantly shattered. He gripped the top of his bald sweating head, raising the gun up to the ceiling, and up against his temple. Just whatever it is, I'm not fighting you. Name it and I should tie your mouth up right now, old man. The boy interrupted. Where the hell is that bloody tape? The lad kept sweating. His glossy skin was apparent even to Pete. All right, you have my oath of silence for the next 30 minutes, after which, I must know what it is that you want. And, you have my promise to say nothing to no one because nothing happened. You're still talking. Right-oh, then. Pete sucked his lips farther into his mouth as a signal that they'd been officially sealed. There was a sigh of relief heard from the youth, who still had the most pensive look of destruction etched onto his countenance. The lad walked around the room, looking down on the floor and entrapped within what was surely a gory confine in the form of his mind. He was troubled. Was this just some lunatic that had escaped from a mental asylum, a man with no apparent logic to his motives, at least, none that could easily have been considered logically digestible? Pete's gut felt iffy. Every extremity in his body tingled with anxiety. As nervous as he was, though, with all sort of hormones now swirling through his bloodstream like not since his days of adolescence, he'd felt like relieving himself in the washroom. The boy finally sat down, snapping out of his pacing escapades as quickly as he'd begun. His mind was back to the present. The youth didn't lie down on the sofa, this time. Gripping the remote, sprightly seated up, he'd studied the tiny black contraption for a moment before pressing on the obvious large red button. The television turned on. After several minutes of flipping through the channels, to Pete's added chagrin, the lad had seemed to settle on a station. Pete peered at the boy in wonder. What had had the young home invader so enthralled about the news? It could only spell one thing: he was running, and hiding out from the law. What has this boy done? Who had Pete Mulligan allowed to just waltz into his home? In fact, Pete would deftly delve into thought, his brow stiffening, as he watched the lad and the screen interchangeably, and as he asked himself, how did the youth break in without being heard, unless? That's it. Sue had forgotten to lock the door behind him.